Have you ever stopped to think about what's keeping you from just, slumping over in your chair right now? Or what holds your head up when you're walking around? It's not something you're actively doing. It's a silent, constant process called muscle tone. It's one of the body's most fundamental systems, and honestly, we almost never think about it. It governs our posture, our readiness to move, pretty much our entire physical form. So let's pull back the curtain on this hidden world of tension.
All right, so here's the game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to define what muscle tone really is, and it's probably not what you think. Then, we'll dive into the automatic reflex that's running the show in the background. After that, we'll zoom way in on the microscopic sensor at the heart of it all. We'll look at how the brain steps in as the master controller, and finally, we'll see what happens when this incredibly intricate system breaks down.
So first up, what exactly is muscle tone? Now, when most of us hear that phrase, we immediately think of going to the gym, right? Visible, defined muscles, a six-pack, but in biology, it's something way deeper and way more essential than that.
Well, that resistance you have against gravity, that state of readiness in your muscles, even when you think they're resting, that is true muscle tone. It's the body's baseline level of muscular tension, and it is working for you every single second of your life.
If we get technical for a second, the scientific definition is key. The most important part is that phrase, sustained, partially contracted state. Your muscles are basically never fully off, never fully relaxed, unless you're maybe unconscious. They're always in this state of slight, continuous contraction, just waiting to either spring into action or simply hold you in place.
What's really interesting is that tone is all about balance. It's a spectrum. If you have too little tone, that's called hypotonia, and it can lead to floppy muscles that don't give you proper support. On the other end, too much tone is hypertonia, and that causes stiff, rigid muscles. The sweet spot, the healthy state, is right there in the middle.
And this really drives home why that balance is so incredibly important. When the nervous system can't regulate tone the right way, it can lead to some really serious conditions like spasticity, where muscles are just continuously and involuntarily contracted. This just goes to show you that muscle tone isn't just about posture. It's actually a vital sign of your neurological health.
Okay. So the big question is, how on earth does the body pull off this constant balancing act? Well, it uses two interconnected systems. First, you've got this local, automatic thing happening at the spinal cord level called the stretch reflex. Then, layered right on top of that, you have what are called supraspinal mechanisms, which is just a fancy way of saying top-down control from the brain, fine-tuning everything.
Let's start from the ground up and look at the automatic foundation of this whole system, the stretch reflex. This is the body's non-stop subconscious regulator. It's amazing.
The stretch reflex is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. If a muscle gets stretched, this reflex automatically makes it contract in response. You've experienced this. Think about when a doctor taps your knee with that little rubber hammer. That tap stretches your thigh muscle, and that triggers this exact reflex, making your leg kick out. It's an automatic system that's constantly working to maintain your muscle length.
This whole thing happens through a really simple and incredibly fast neural circuit called a reflex arc. It's this direct feedback loop that is so quick it doesn't even need to bother the brain for a basic response.
Let's trace that loop. Step 1 kicks off right inside the muscle itself. There's this tiny sensory receptor called the muscle spindle, and its whole job is to detect when the muscle has been stretched. As soon as it does, it fires off a signal along what's called an afferent, or incoming nerve, and that signal heads straight for the spinal cord.
In step 2, that signal zips into the spinal cord, which acts like the local control center for the reflex. This is what makes it so mind-bogglingly fast. The message doesn't have to take the long trip all the way up to the brain and back down again.
And finally, step 3. The spinal cord immediately sends a new command back out, along an efferent, or outgoing, motor nerve. This command tells the very same muscle that just got stretched to contract, resisting that stretch and bringing it back to its original length. And that's it. The loop is complete in a fraction of a second.
Now, that reflex arc is incredible. But the real star of the show, the real hero here, is that tiny sensor where it all began. So let's zoom way in on the muscle spindle, the body's microscopic length detector. This thing is just brilliant.
Honestly, the best way to think of the spindle is as a length-detecting device. Its entire job is just to measure how long a muscle is and how fast that length is changing. Because it does this, it acts as a homeostatic organ, which means it's constantly working to keep the muscle at a stable, desirable length. It's a peacekeeper.
So if we look closer, you can see how the spindle is embedded right there alongside the main working muscle fibers. But the spindle itself has its own tiny specialized muscle fibers called intrafusal fibers, and these are purely for sensing. They're like little spies inside the system reporting back on what's happening.
Inside that spindle are those special intrafusal fibers. Now, they've got some pretty complex names like nuclear bag and chain fibers, but here's the main thing you need to know. Their central part, called the equatorial zone, is a pure sensor. It can't contract. Its only job is to detect stretch. That's it.
So, okay, we've got this amazing automatic reflex. But if it was purely automatic, our movements would be pretty jerky and robotic, right? That's where the brain comes in. It acts as the master controller, constantly fine-tuning that basic reflex to make it smooth and useful. The brain pulls us off through a genius process called alpha-gamma coactivation. Here's how it works. When your brain decides to contract a muscle, it sends a signal to the main muscle fibers through what are called alpha motor neurons. But at the exact same time, it sends a separate signal down gamma motor neurons to those little sensor fibers inside the spindle, telling them to tighten up too. This keeps the spindle taut. Think of it like pulling a measuring tape tight to get an accurate reading. If the spindle went all slack while the muscle shortened, it wouldn't be able to sense anything. This coactivation makes sure it stays sensitive and ready to go.
And the result of this is incredible versatility. This coactivation process is how the brain adjusts the sensitivity of our stretch reflex on the fly. It lets us have really high tone when we need to, say, lift a heavy box, and then really low, delicate tone when we need to do something precise, like holding a pen. It's the difference between a simple reflex and a skilled, voluntary movement.
Which brings us full circle. We've looked at the automatic reflex and the brain's incredible top-down control. So now we can really understand what happens when that control system gets damaged.
So what this all means is that when those descending pathways from the brain get damaged, maybe from a stroke, an injury, or a disease, the brain's ability to fine-tune those gamma motor neurons is lost. This throws the whole stretch reflex system out of whack and often makes it overactive. The result is hypertonia, that severe stiffness and rigidity that we see in conditions like spasticity.
And this brings us right back to that doctor's hammer test. Clinicians use a grading scale just like this one to test the integrity of this entire system. A normal, brisk kick is what they call a 2+. But if there's no response at all, a 0, or a really over-the-top, rhythmic, bouncing response called clonus, a 4+, those are huge red flags that the brain's top-down control just isn't working the way it should be.
So in the end, muscle tone is this beautiful, dynamic conversation happening constantly between our muscles, our spinal cord, and our brain. It's a hidden system of tension and control that runs in the background, making basically everything else we do possible. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other incredible automatic processes are happening inside you right now that you're completely overlooking?